What defines an icon? Is it the sparkle in their eyes, the admiration of millions, the embodiment of a dream? Or is it the ability to construct a mask so perfect that the world falls in love with it, without ever questioning the darkness it conceals? Today, here on The Truth, Dark Psychology, we will pull back the veil on one of history's most magnetic personalities, analyzing not just the glamour, but the psychological tools of power that immortalized her. If you're interested in the unspoken truths behind great figures, subscribe and like this video, because we are about to dive deep into the mind of an angel with a complex strategy. The persona known as Marilyn Monroe was not born. She was meticulously manufactured. This is perhaps the first and most powerful act of dark psychology in her story, the conscious dissociation from Norma Jean Mortensen. Norma Jean was a girl marked by trauma, the instability of foster homes, and a profound sense of invisibility. The creation of Marilyn was a psychological armor, an entity designed to be everything Norma Jean was not: desired, confident, and above all, in control of the attention she received. This duality allowed her to protect her vulnerable self while the public persona faced the brutality of the industry. This process of creating an alter ego is a fascinating power tactic. By giving the public a character, she controlled the narrative. Marilyn was a caricature of femininity and innocence, traits that were both disarming and enchanting. She studied her mannerisms, the whispered voice, the calculated walk. Every gesture was a piece of a puzzle designed to evoke a specific response: protection, desire, and underestimation. By being underestimated as the dumb blonde, she gained a tactical advantage, moving more freely behind the scenes where her true intelligence and ambition operated. The physical transformation was only the surface of this strategy. The name change, the hair color, the clothes, all of these were external signifiers of a deep internal restructuring. She understood that in Hollywood, perception is reality. By presenting the world with a perfectly packaged fantasy, she became the master of the first impression. People did not interact with a real woman. They interacted with an archetype that she herself created and sold with unshakable conviction. A product so well finished that even she, at times, seemed to get lost in the illusion she built. The dark. Genius here lies in the understanding that authenticity can be a weakness in a predatory environment. Instead of showing her scars, she covered them with glitter. Marilyn wasn't just acting in films. Her public life was her greatest performance. This continuous performance required a level of mental energy and emotional control that is hard to measure. A constant state of vigilance to ensure the mask never fully slipped, revealing the fragile operator behind the curtain. In the end, invention of Marilyn was an act of survival that transformed into a tool of domination. She didn't just want to be seen. She wanted to control how she was seen. This distinction is crucial. It wasn't about validation. It was about orchestration. She offered the world a mirror that reflected their own desires and fantasies, and in doing so, she made herself indispensable, an icon whose power emanated from the illusion she so brilliantly sustained. Marilyn Monroe's charisma was intrinsically linked to a projected vulnerability that was both genuine and performative. She exuded a fragility that made everyone around her, from fans to movie moguls, feel an irresistible impulse to protect her. This is a subtle but immensely effective form of control. By appearing to be the damsel in distress, she inverted the power dynamic, making powerful men believe they were in charge, when in fact, they were responding to a stimulus she carefully calibrated. This savior complex that she activated in others was one of her greatest weapons. Her breathy voice, her lost gaze, and her apparent need for approval were not just personality traits. They were instruments of seduction and influence. People didn't just fall in love with her beauty, but with the idea that they could be the one to finally fix or understand her. This longing to be the hero in her story placed her at the center of an emotional universe that she herself governed. Even if she seemed to be the victim, behind this facade of helplessness there was a sharp emotional intelligence. Marilyn knew how to read people, identify their needs, and mirror their desires. She understood the power of paradox, to be the most desired woman in the world and yet seem the loneliest. This contradiction created a mystery that kept people perpetually intrigued and engaged. The need to unravel her enigma made her a constant object of fascination, ensuring that the attention on her never waned. Manipulation through vulnerability also served as a defense mechanism. By adopting a posture of fragility, she could disarm critics and avoid direct confrontations. How could anyone brutally attack a figure who seemed to be always on the verge of tears? This tactic allowed her to navigate the dangerous waters of Hollywood, where competition was fierce and alliances were fragile. Her apparent weakness was, in fact, her strongest armor, deflecting attacks and generating sympathy. Instead, it's a complex psychological game. By positioning herself as the weakest link, she often became the center of power. People competed for her attention, for her affection, for a chance to enter her inner circle. She transformed need into desire, and loneliness into an aura of exclusivity. The dark lesson here is that power does not always manifest through obvious strength and domination. Sometimes it hides in a tear, in a whisper, and in the promise of a broken soul that only you can heal. Marilyn Monroe's notorious lack of punctuality and her often erratic behavior on film sets were not just signs of insecurity or emotional instability. They were, in many cases, unconscious or even deliberate displays of power. In an industry where time is money and discipline is paramount, making an entire film set with stars, directors, and producers wait for her was the ultimate assertion of her indispensability. She was chaotically dictating the pace, proving that the rules applied to others did not apply to her. This pattern of behavior created an environment of dependency and anticipation. No one knew when or if she would show up, which made her the constant center of all conversations and concerns. This control through unpredictability is a powerful manipulation tactic. It keeps others in a state of imbalance, unable to plan or relax, forcing them to focus all their energy on her. When she finally arrived and delivered a brilliant performance, the relief and gratitude were so intense that resentments were temporarily forgotten. Behind the chaos, there was a desperate struggle for autonomy. As a woman in a male-dominated system, Monroe had few traditional avenues of power. She couldn't direct, produce, or finance her own films at the start. So she used the few tools she had: her body, her talent, and her ability to disrupt the machine. Being late, questioning directors, demanding multiple takes, all of this can be seen as a rebellion against a system that viewed her as a profitable property, not as an artist. Asterisk, the chaos also served to test loyalties and measure her own value. Who would stand by her despite the difficulties? Who would defend her against the studios? Her behavior was a filter, separating those who were there just for the Marilyn product from those who had some regard for Norma Jean. This dynamic created an inner circle of protectors and enablers, who became accomplices in maintaining her power, often to their own detriment. The psychological lesson here is about how disruption can become a form of control. In a rigid system, the person who is willing to be the broken gear can, paradoxically, become the most important one. Marilyn demonstrated that by refusing to be punctual, predictable, and easy, she forced the world to turn on her own axis, even if that axis was unstable and self-destructive. The price of this control was high, but for her, it seemed to be the only way to have any agency over her own destiny. Asterisk. One of the most complex facets of Marilyn Monroe's power was her ability to function as a mirror for the unresolved traumas and desires of those around her. Powerful men, like the playwright Arthur Miller and the baseball icon Joe DiMaggio, did not just marry a movie star. They married a symbol, a project onto which they could inscribe their own narratives of salvation, power, or redemption. She became the blank canvas for the psychological projections of others. Asterisk for Arthur Miller, an intellectual of the elite. Marrying Monroe was an act of defiance and perhaps an attempt to unite the brain and the body, the mind and desire. He saw in her a misunderstood poetic soul, a victim of the system whom he, the great writer, could rescue and elevate. However, this projection ignored her complexity, turning her into a character from one of his plays. The relationship was doomed, because he fell in love with an idea, not the real woman with her own ambitions and demons. Joe DiMaggio, on the other hand, saw in her the embodiment of a traditional American ideal he wanted to possess and protect. He desired a devoted wife, away from the spotlight, a Norma Jean he could mold. His inability to accept the public persona of Marilyn led to constant conflict. He wanted to control and contain the very magnetism that had initially attracted him. Both men tried to shape her into something that served their own psychological needs, failing to see that her power lay precisely in her refusal to be contained. Monroe's ability to attract these saviors reveals a deep, perhaps instinctive, understanding of the psychology of neediness. She sensed the void in others because she carried an immense void within herself. This resonance created a magnetic attraction. She offered the promise of fulfillment to the intellectual. She was the muse. To the hero, the damsel. In return, she received the security and validation she desperately sought, even if temporarily, in a vicious cycle of mutual dependence. This phenomenon teaches us about the nature of attraction and power in relationships. We often don't fall in love with who a person is, but with the role they can play in our personal story. Marilyn Monroe was the ultimate projection screen. Her tragedy and her power come from the same place. She was such a perfect reflection of others' desires that her own self became increasingly difficult to find, both for her and for those who loved her. Asterisk, asterisk, dramatic pause. Music fades. Slightly. Asterisk, 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 narrator. Asterisk, asterisk, we are at the exact halfway point of our analysis, and the complexity of this figure only grows. If you're enjoying how we unravel these psychological layers, don't forget to leave a like to support the channel. And if there's another personality whose mind you'd like to see explored here, comment their name below. Now let's get back to the game of light and shadow in Hollywood. Many portray Marilyn Monroe as a passive victim of the studio system, but the reality is much more complex and reveals a strategic fighter. Tired of being repeatedly cast in the dumb blonde role and receiving salaries far lower than her co-stars, she made one of the boldest decisions of her career. In 1954, she broke her contract with 20th Century Fox and founded her own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions, MP. This was not the act of a temperamental diva, but a calculated power move. By creating MMP, she was declaring war on the studio system of control, which treated actors like commodities. She moved to New York to study at the Actors Studio with Lee Strasberg, seeking to improve her craft and gain the credibility that Hollywood denied her. This move shocked the industry. A star at the height of her popularity, turning her back on Hollywood to seek artistic legitimacy was unprecedented. She was risking everything to prove she was more than a sex symbol. This power play was a lesson in negotiation and leverage. Fox, realizing its biggest star was about to slip from its control, was forced to the negotiating table. The new contract Monroe secured after this rebellion was revolutionary. It gave her not only a much larger salary, but also a level of creative control unprecedented for an actress at that time, including the right to approve directors and scripts. She used her influence as a product to become the producer. The creation of MP was also an act of psychological warfare. She exposed the hypocrisy of the studios, which profited millions from her image while devaluing her as an artist. By seeking knowledge with Strasbourg, she was arming herself with the tools of the serious actor, challenging the public perception that the industry itself had built. She was rewriting her own narrative, refusing to be just the object and insisting on being the subject of her own career. The price of this fight, however, was immense. The pressure to prove her worth, combined with her deep-seated insecurities, exacerbated her problems with anxiety and dependency. The victory in the professional field came at a very high personal cost. The story of her production company is a dark reminder that the pursuit of control in an oppressive environment requires extraordinary sacrifices, and that even in winning the battle, the scars of war can be permanent. The most enduring image of Marilyn Monroe is that of a woman adored by millions, yet profoundly lonely. This paradox is central to understanding her psychology. The charisma that drew the crowds was the same that created an insurmountable barrier between her and a genuine human connection. People didn't see Norma Jean. They saw the reflection of their own dreams and desires projected onto the figure of Marilyn. She was perpetually surrounded by admirers, yet fundamentally alone. This loneliness was exacerbated by the nature of her fame. Every interaction was mediated by her public persona. A simple dinner in a restaurant turned into a spectacle. How could she trust that someone's interest was genuine and not an attempt to get close to the icon? This constant distrust isolated her further, creating a cycle of loneliness and a search for validation in the wrong places, such as tumultuous relationships or the anonymous adulation of the masses. Psychologically, this dynamic is devastating. The Marilyn persona that protected her at the beginning of her career eventually became her prison. She couldn't simply turn off the charisma and fame. This inability to blend into a crowd and be anonymous deprived her of basic human experiences. Fame, which seemed to be the solution to the invisibility she felt in childhood, became a different, and perhaps crueler form of isolation. The control she exercised over her public image had an inverse cost in her private life. The more the Marilyn persona became powerful and iconic, the weaker and more invisible Norma Jean felt. It's the classic tragedy of the creator being consumed by their creation. The woman behind the mask longed to be seen, loved for who she really was, but the brightness of the mask was so intense that it completely obscured the face behind it. The dark lesson here is about the price of idolatry. When we turn a person into a symbol, we dehumanize them. The crowd's adoration isn't love, it's a form of consumption. Marilyn Monroe was perhaps the most consumed figure of the 20th century. Her story forces us to question our own relationship with fame and idols, reminding us that behind every shiny image we admire, there may be a real person fighting a loneliness that the adoration itself helps to create. Marilyn Monroe's psychological power was so immense that it transcended her own life. Decades after her death, her image continues to exert a fascinating control over popular culture. She has become an archetype, a visual and emotional shortcut for concepts like glamour, tragedy, sexuality, and the American dream. Her untimely death cemented her iconic status, freezing her forever in youth and beauty, preventing the image from degrading over time. This posthumous control is the ultimate form of narrative manipulation. By dying at the height of mystery, she left behind an unsolved puzzle. The absence of a clear ending to her story allows each new generation to project their own theories, fears, and fantasies onto her. She is not here to correct the record, to grow old, or to make mistakes. Her image is now an open text, and this ambiguity is the key to her enduring relevance. The continued use of her image in advertising, art, and film demonstrates the lasting power of the symbol she created. She sells products, inspires artists, and generates debates to this day. She has become public property in the most literal sense, and yet, the essence of who she was remains elusive. This is the power of a well-built personal brand. It outlives its creator and continues to operate in the world autonomously. The tragedy of her death also serves as a cautionary tale, a dark narrative about the dangers of fame. This aspect of her story adds a layer of depth that makes her more than just a pretty face. She represents both the pinnacle of success and the abyss of despair. This duality makes her infinitely more interesting and complex, ensuring her story is told and retold as a modern fable about the cost of genius and ambition. In the end, Marilyn Monroe's greatest trick was becoming immortal. She used charisma, seduction, and control to build a persona so powerful that not even death could destroy it. Her legacy is the definitive proof that psychological influence, when wielded with mastery, can shape reality far beyond an individual's life. The woman Norma Jean may have been lost along the way. The entity Marilyn achieved a form of power that few in history have managed to equal. The line between inspiration and manipulation, between charisma and control, is often thin and dangerous. Marilyn Monroe's story is not just about Hollywood glamour, but about the complex strategies we use to survive, to be seen, and to control our destiny, even if the price is our own soul. What do you think about the tactics she used? Was it genius, desperation, or both? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We want to know what you think. And if you value this search for the truth behind appearances, don't forget to subscribe to The Truth, Dark Psychology, and hit the notification bell. There is always another layer of the truth waiting to be revealed. Until next time.